Hello, welcome to Ekklesia Contemporary Ballet, Dance and Dialogue. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, we just wanted to share with you a little bit about who we are and what we do. We are a professional faith-based dance company that works in partnership with the Church of the Holy Trinity in Middletown, Connecticut. We are excited to be in such a central location, partnering with a church who shares the same mission and vision. We are both working to lift up social justice issues that plague our society, finding ways that we can overcome that which divides us with meaningful discussions around art and faith. The company meets 4 times a week in the spacious studios located in the church for discussions, class, and rehearsals. We are passionate about what we do, and we are thankful for all who have partnered with us to keep us going through the pandemic. Hi everyone, and welcome to Ekklesia Contemporary Ballet, Dance and Dialogue for the month of March. Our discussion topic this evening is caring for the earth and how we can look at this issue from a theological view, and also how it's already affecting our way of life here in Connecticut. My name is Alyssa Stroth, and I use the pronouns she and her, and I am the artistic director and founder of Ekklesia. Before we begin, I first want to introduce Morley Van Ypres, who is our theologian in residence.
Hello, my name is Morley, and I work with the company to discuss theological scaffolding for the work that we do. So we want to interact with the work and see how we can, our faith applies to it, and how our faith activates our work, and how our faith can build community through our work and within the company. I look forward to tonight.
Thank you, Morley. And now I want to introduce Rochelle Stevenson, who is the assistant director of the company.
My name is Rochelle. This is my 4th season with the company, and I just wanted to touch base on a few of the movements that you're going to see in tonight's piece. Sometimes it's a little bit abstract, so just to be able to understand one of the perspectives from this. In general, these 2 works are both a way to personify nature. It's a way for us to, as dancers and as people, understand creation and understand our place within creation. And so the first work you're going to see is Winter, and it features Sasha, who you'll meet in a minute. She's going to be wearing blue. The second piece is Spring, which is the one we're going to be talking a little bit more about, and that features Emily, who's wearing green. So you'll see them, and I hope that will help to understand maybe how their reactions specifically are interpreted in this piece and how you can interpret them as well. We'd love to hear how you interpret it, because there's so many different ways this piece can go, and we're continuing to discover it just as much as you. Another movement I wanted to show you specifically in Spring that really stands out to me has to do with Emily being Spring. When she grabs this prop, which you'll see in a minute, it's a string, and she sweeps it across the stage. At that moment, my specific movement, which was really an open to interpretation, just comes down, and it's a reaction to her swooping as we come back. So it's a turning to come back with it. There's not a ton of symbolism in that, other than the just all-encompassing aspect of her sweeping it. At that moment, the string for me represents a flood. And so it just out of nowhere just takes over, and you just get whirlwinded up into it. And then it's a dramatic fall on top of it. So keep an eye out for that movement. And I'd love to hear your interpretation of it, because that's just how I see that movement. Sasha.
Hello, my name is Sasha. I'm a dancer with Ekklesia. Thank you, Ricky, for the introduction. And I'll touch on a movement that means a lot to me in the spring dance. There's a part at the end of the dance that involves a lot of string, and there's a moment where the dancer in the middle, she leans forward onto the string and is dragged back. And to me, that makes me think of images that I've seen, and maybe other people have seen too, of sea animals in the ocean or rivers and lakes, just bodies of water caught up in plastic. There's a lot of plastic waste and garbage that seeps into bodies of water, and animals get caught in it, whether it's nets or cups or those plastic things that you have around soda cans. And this like struggle and this entrapment that is expressed with the partnering in the string, I feel like really exemplifies what those animals are probably going through when they're in the water. And then also, since Ricky brought up winter, I'm just going to say one movement that really means a lot to me in winter. There's a moment where I walk forward and have this like moment where I kind of like concave forward a little with my chest, and I'm the only one that moves in that moment. And to me, it signifies that lots of times when we talk about problems with the environment or struggles and things like that, a lot of people don't want to hear it or are hesitant to believe it because it doesn't affect them personally. And so that is kind of an embodiment of the fact that like, even though the people around me are still, one person is still hurting, and that doesn't, the fact that the other people aren't feeling it doesn't take away the legitimacy of the one person that is hurting. So just some things to look for in the dance. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily. I am a company artist with Ekklesia. And as Sasha mentioned, and Ricky mentioned, I'm spring and Sasha is winter. So you'll be seeing those two today. One move from spring, well, I'll mention two today, that, let's bring you up a little bit, that draw meaning to me. There's this moment in both winter and spring that I do this. Up and over concave motion. I step back, up and over. And that reminds me of, and honestly, similar to Ricky, I think of a flood, and I think about, I enjoy that there's a crossover in that movement between the two pieces. So you can find a crossover in seasons. You know how spring creeps up on winter, as it is right now. It's getting a little warm right now. So I think about that. And another moment for me when I'm in spring, we do a lot of partnering with the string, and there's a moment where I fall back on the string and the string catches me, and then it brings me forward and then it drags me back again. In those moments, I find like a loss of a sense of control, and how, you know, as humanity, we feel that we are always in control, but there are many moments where we are not. Like, our outside environment is impacting us so much. So that string to me is our outside environment controlling us while still trying to hold on. So take a look for those movements in the piece. The partnering with the string is a blast to do. Thank you.
My name is India, and I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and this is my first season with the company. And my movement that really speaks to me is the very end of spring, where Ricky, Sasha, and I, after bundling Emily in a knot of ribbon or string, we all of a sudden are letting go, and we lift our hands like this. And then there's a melting action as we walk off stage. And to me, that's a realization or a revelatory moment in which we all of a sudden realize what we have done to spring, which is personified by Emily.
Thank you, everyone. Dance and Dialogue always includes two special guests that help us dive deeper into the issue that we're addressing. We are honored to have Alex Rodriguez as our community advocate this evening. He is a community advocate for Save the Sound, an organization dedicated to protecting and improving the land, water, and air of Connecticut and the Long Island Sound. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks for having me today, Alyssa. Hello to everyone watching. I'm Alex Rodriguez, and as Alyssa mentioned, I work with Save the Sound, and I have a moral obligation to protect the environment at all costs. I grew up in Connecticut, in West Hartford, and what got me involved in the environmental movement was a couple things. It was special interests vying for control of my community's local water supply. And it was also my family in Puerto Rico being impacted by Hurricane Maria, and observing the previous administration's very horrendous response to that. It was clear to me observing these factors that climate change, corporate greed, and institutional racism were linked, and I felt a moral duty to speak out against it. And so what I do today to combat it is I build coalition. I support climate-related communications. I engage the community in these discussions, and I advocate at the Capitol constantly, and I'm always looking to make new connections, and that's why I'm so pleased to be here today with the Ekklesia project.
Thank you, Alex. We're just delighted to have you. And our next guest is our clergy advocate, Virginia Army. Virginia Army is a priest at St. John's Episcopal Church in Vernon, Connecticut. St. John's has been at the forefront of the witness for care of God's creation in the Episcopal Church of Connecticut. Welcome, Virginia.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here with you this evening. St. John's has been doing this important work and bringing witness about the importance of environmental stewardship and facing the challenges of climate change for many, many years. I came here about 12 and a half years ago to Vernon, and we've done a lot together to green the parish, to help parishioners to green their homes and their lifestyles. The effort we're probably proudest of is that we have a very large organic garden, and all the food that we raise in the garden, fruit and vegetables, we start having produce in May, and last year it went all the way through the end of October. We give it all to the Cornerstone, which is in Vernon Rockville, and they have a soup kitchen. And so all the food is used to feed persons who are hungry, and many of them are homeless. And so this is a place where we see social justice intersecting with environmental witness, and we're pleased to be a part of that effort locally.
Well, great work
tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I also have the honor of introducing the composer of Body and Land, Scott Simonelli. He is the musical genius behind our movement. Scott is the founder and CEO of Veritonic Incorporated, and he will be sharing with us more about his concepts and process in creating the music after we watch the work for the first time. So now a little bit about the work right before you see it. Body and Land is a 4-part dance work, which follows the path of the 4 seasons. We have worked with composer Scott Simonelli to blend original composition with that of Vivaldi's 4 seasons. Through this combination of modern and classical music, we wanted to show the parallel of how the seasons have drastically changed from Vivaldi's 18th century world to the 21st century. Winter has sounds of cracking glaciers, spring calls attention to fierce flooding, summer depicts destructive forest fires, and autumn explores turbulent winds and hurricanes. Our aim is for this work to accomplish 2 things: to feel the changes of the earth in a personal way, and also to give voice to the people who are affected the most. So right before we are about to show the film, I just wanted to have some questions for the audience. So as you watch the work, just think about, what does the dance make you feel? And what parts might stick out to you as beautiful in the dancing or in the music? And what parts maybe stick out to you as distorted or not so beautiful in the dancing and the music, and maybe what that represents to you? And now we will present Body and Land, part 1 and 2, Winter and Spring. And now we will hear from composer Scott Simonelli.
Great. My video is, it just says video is not, oh, I'm back.
Ah, great.
All right. Well, great. So that's a tough act to follow. So thank you for giving me a moment to talk about it. And there's a few things that are interesting that happen individually across each piece. So in winter and in spring, but also that happen across all four parts of the project. So the first thing that I'll start with the things that kind of happen throughout all of the movements. And so for this, and this may be a touch redundant if you heard the last one, but I made a point of using all natural sounds and organic instruments. That it's I thought because it involved nature and that sort of stuff that I wanted to use real instruments wherever possible, using real guitars or organic sounds. So that finding a sample of ice breaking or of rain or of even the drum sounds are manipulated sounds of nature. So nothing is synthesized or that sort of stuff. And so I try to stay in touch with the kind of organic sound, which is a fun thing to do because there's so many sounds in nature and everyday life that are musical if you spend the time to listen to them. So that was a fun aspect to look at. And then for the Vivaldi aspect of it, I tried to find live performances of Vivaldi using period instruments. So there's a lot of interpretations of the Four Seasons. It's been around for a really long time and it's very popular. And so there's no shortage of interpretations, but finding versions where they use the original instruments and finding versions that were live so that it felt natural. And I also tried to find aspects of each movement that were the furthest from the well-known parts, because I think there's just so much with climate change and just all the aspects around climate change can be a very subtle thing. It kind of can be hiding in plain sight, even as these things start to happen. And I tried to find the areas of the Vivaldi that could be furthest from center. So as you depart from that, it feels like it can happen. So I foreshadowed the departure early in each piece, and sometimes it's very subtle. And I actually just listening to it myself now on Zoom, it's hard to hear some of it. So if you ever have the chance, I don't know if it's available to kind of listen to it with headphones on, but there's little kind of whispers that happen there. And I always love in music when you listen to something a couple times, you find new things. And so that foreshadowing does happen in each of the pieces. And sometimes it's very subtle. Sometimes it's a little more obvious, but that kind of comes in and happens in the end. And so with Winter, you kind of hear that haunting voice, and then it eventually starts to come apart. And the choreography obviously just does a fantastic job of conveying that as well. And the music kind of is there underneath it. And then with Spring, there's obviously the flooding and the water sounds or the rain sounds that you can hear there. But then I had this vision of just kind of and seeing it with the string now was really cool. It's just like, it seemed to really fit like this idea that like something's trying to bloom, but it's having a hard time. Spring is such a joyful time of year as we're starting to experience now. And it's just the idea that like this could be muted or distorted. And so all the guitar sounds you hear at the end of that are reversed. So I actually played that guitar part and then we made it backwards because they're trying to come out and it just can't. And it's just, to me, that was just gut wrenching. And seeing the and get choked up talking about it, but seeing the string there actually is like, it was that restraint and kind of that interaction with and I don't want to interpret the choreography for anybody on the composer, but yeah, it just really felt fitting to me of that idea of something trying to come out that just is having a hard time because it's just underwater or is being depressed in some way. And so those are the kind of themes that happen. And I think it's a really interesting project to go back and listen to if you have the chance to hear those little subtleties, to think like, wow, that's wood being struck, or that's the sound of a glacier coming apart, or that's real rain, or that is backwards. And what does that sound like to me? And kind of diving in there, because it's for me, I like to geek out on that and really listen to it. But I think it serves hopefully serves the choreography well. And so that's the background on the piece.
Thank you so much, Scott. That's so great.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think right now, I mean, what the piece is about is really being able to connect our bodies to the earth, to the land. And right now we're, I think we can relate to it in a way even more with coming out of COVID and how our bodies are broken, like the land is broken. We can sort of maybe connect with it in that way, I hope. Ricky, do you have any questions for us from the audience?
Yeah, I have a few. So thank you, Paula, for your comment. Paula said the sounds were very realistic, describing nature. And I know you touched a little bit, Scott, on how you use natural sounds at parts and how you blended that with Vivaldi. But I would love to just have you elaborate on there. Is there anything else musically as far as like tempo or forgetting the word tune, anything else musically that you use nature as a either an inspiration for, or you try to purposely distort from nature in either winter or spring? I'd just love to hear more on that.
Yeah, I did try to, so starting with tempo. So the, dance is such an, dance always has rhythm. And I'm always fascinated when I see, especially in modern dance, and whenever I'm lucky enough to see it, it's always amazing when you see things happening, but there's no obvious rhythm in the dance. It's like, it can be silent or it can be strings, and there's not like a drum happening, where it's like, here you feel the beat, and dancers obviously feel that. And so especially like with the Vivaldi, I changed the time of the Vivaldi to kind of like, the technical term is quantized. So I actually made it more of a steady beat, because in a live performance, there's a lot of ebbs and flows in the beat. And I actually made it more static in its kind of movements, so that for one, it wouldn't seem really jarring when it got to the second piece, but two, this idea that like, we're basically distorting nature, like nature moves on its own. And I wanted the piece to at least feel a little constrained kind of all the way through. And so I didn't want it to just be this flowing, glorious Vivaldi. Otherwise you could just do flowing glory. You don't need, you can just kind of do that on your own. So I did tempo adjust the Vivaldi, which you can do now a little more easily without changing the pitch. And then for the intonation and timbre and that sort of stuff, I did go with the keys it was in. So like if I chose a piece that was in a certain key, I did make it work in that key. I did try to use, particularly in winter, there's a lot of intentional dissonance there. If you listen closely, that voice that comes in is not really in tune with the Vivaldi at that point. It's and then that was on purpose. Like I wanted it to sound like it was cracking the whole time, and so I just felt like if that voice came in and just like sounded, like it fit too well, to me that wasn't what we were going for. So I think if you went back and listened to it, you probably notice it's a little more straight, after the fact.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So now I'm just over. Oh, sorry, Ricky. I just wanted to see if we could go ahead and shift over to our advocates. Just hearing a little bit from Rodriguez about his climate advocacy, and go ahead, Alex.
Okay. Well, I definitely just want to second what Scott was saying about the dissonance that I noticed in regards to both clips. It was clear that the balance of what we know was being thrown off. Winter, spring, summer, fall. Each year becomes hotter, and it has a disastrous impact on our livelihood, and that's why mitigation of carbon emissions is so crucial to protecting public health. Something that we are striving for at Save the Sound in my department, which is climate, is mitigation. Back in 2008, the state passed the Global Warming Solutions Act to put the state in require the state to meet greenhouse gas of 80% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. In 2018, I was just a couple years into the movement, and I organized a lobby day, and I helped bring in the political power, the community power needed to require the state to put a more immediate target of 45% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. And even then, we got our goal accomplished. But there is still a lot more that needs to be done. I think in regards to the big businesses, big oil, folks working in transportation, they need to be able to see themselves in what we're doing as well. That's why coalition building is so important. They need to be assured that they have employment as we strive for a green economy. And that's why we're, at the same time, we're looking for climate accountability. We're also striving for a clean energy economy that greatly considers our transportation system. We're advocating for the Transportation Climate Initiative to be legislated. It is being legislated in a bill that the governor's office introduced called SB 884, an act concerning transportation-related emissions. What we're striving for is a cap on transportation-related emissions, and if transportation companies or anyone dealing with transportation fuels, if they surpass what they are bound to, then they have to invest. They have to invest those extra monies in environmental justice communities. At least 35% of the investments need to go into environmental justice communities. And for those who are unsure of what an environmental justice community is, it is generally a community with a high minority population, a high Black or Latino population, significant demographic of non-English speaking individuals. But most notably, at least 30% of individuals living below the federal poverty line. It's these individuals that we're fighting for. We're fighting for mitigation of carbon emissions to protect their public health, but also ensure that we have jobs in transportation infrastructure for the future. We want to see the future of transportation become electrified. Because many other countries are doing it, and some states are picking up on this. Just about a month ago, Connecticut unveiled its first electric school bus in Middletown, and this was after a 3-year-long campaign that I had participated in my previous occupation as an organizer with the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. And I think the last point that I want to make about the state of the environment in a legislative manner is really getting communities to think more about how important it is to reduce, reuse, and recycle. There is what is called the zero waste hierarchy, and you can learn more about this on energyjusticenetwork.org. The zero waste hierarchy is a guide to help individuals reduce their consumer habits, because much of what we buy is made with non-biodegradable materials. And in Connecticut, we're dealing with a recycling crisis, waste management crisis, and this in turn is a public health crisis. And this intersects with the climate crisis because a majority of Connecticut's waste is burned in Hartford and in Bridgeport. Hartford and Bridgeport have two of the biggest incinerators in the state, and they burn hundreds of tons of our solid waste every day, 24/7. And this has been the norm for decades, and this is not sustainable. What we're striving for at Save the Sound, and in concert with many of my environmental colleagues, is we're advocating for modernization and expansion of the bottle bill. We're advocating for more extended producer responsibility of companies to make sure that they are creating biodegradable materials, or materials that are at least easily recyclable. We want to hold big food waste generators accountable to composting their what they generate, because food is life. Food has energy, and we should restore that back to the soil once it is once we are done with it. It's a part of the circle of life, and so I just wanted to touch a little bit on those things. I'm not sure if there's anything else I should elaborate on, Alyssa.
Yeah, I have a question actually. One thing that I can't shake from our last speaker that we had, Teresa Eichel, she said that kids in Bridgeport miss a third of the school year from pollution. And do you think that that's from the incinerators? Is it from the plastics factories that are there? What is the cause of that? And my second part of that question is, how do we help inform our wealthier communities in Connecticut of the impacts like this is having on children? I think that might, because there's so much information, but when we hear just like that one fact, like I personally couldn't shake it. And I'm like, how can we help? So if you could help answer those questions, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. So in regards to the first part of that question, it is true. Asthma is the number one cause of absenteeism in Connecticut and in the United States. And asthma and other respiratory diseases have been further aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic, because individuals suffering from a respiratory disease, or individuals with a low immune system are greatly more susceptible to COVID, and the results could be fatal. And that's why that's why in the bill I mentioned earlier regarding climate accountability, HB 6551. I don't think I had told you guys the bill number. It is an act concerning environmental air quality. This is such an important piece of legislation because what we are looking to do is we are looking to give environmental justice communities, and I'm not only talking about communities of color and low-income communities. I'm also talking about rural communities. I'm talking about the disability community. Everybody should have a fair say in a dignified life for themselves. We want to make sure that they are a part of an environmental equity board under HB 6551. But the true my favorite part of HB 6551 is the legal precedent that we're striving to give the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the Siting Council. We want to give them more legal precedent to deny hazardous permit applications in these communities that are most vulnerable to environmental toxins and environmental injustices. They've been given the bare brunt, the harshest end of these environmental injustices, and that needs to change. As for what I think wealthier communities can do to support this issue, I noticed that there is some opposition from more conservative members of the legislature on the bills that we are pushing, because they deem us anti-business, and that what we're pushing for is not equitable to them. But what we're advocating for is, in fact, a transfer of power, in a way, because it is never easy to relinquish your power and give other folks a seat at the table, but it should be like the performances in the clips from earlier. We should strive for equality, and I think the more that wealthier communities support environmental justice-led organizations, disability-led organizations, racial justice-focused organizations, I think that's what will make this movement a little more equal and give communities a fairer chance at the dignified lives that they're striving for. I hope I answered that okay, Alyssa.
Great. Yeah, and maybe we can toss that over to and hear from Reverend Virginia now, and maybe she can also lift that up as well and how we can connect more. Thank you.
God is the divine spark in all of life. I believe that. God created the earth, the sky, the air, the water, all living things, and God called it good. God created human beings in God's own image, and God created human beings to be stewards of God's creation, not exploiters of God's creation. But the problem is that humans are wayward. They're greedy. We are inclined towards the exercise of raw power, of domination. We're inclined to put ourselves first, ahead of others and ahead of the common good. The church, the Judeo-Christian tradition calls this sin, and I actually was very struck by the spring dance this evening, and the way in which the use of the thread or the rope. For me, I really saw how entangling sin is. And when I talk about sin, I'm not talking about an individual set of acts. I'm talking about a state of living apart from God's love and apart from God's will for all human beings, which is for us to live together in harmony and to take care of each other. And sin in this regard, and if you define it that way, it's subtle, it's always present, and it entangles us, it traps us, and we become self-sabotage experts, really, in some ways, in terms of how we move and work in the world. And it causes our neighbors, our communities, a lot of difficulty. Both the Old Testament and the New Testament reveal a God who cares deeply about the poor, the marginalized, the other, the outsider, the lost, the least, the lonely. God cares about all those people, and that is lifted up from the beginning of the Bible right to the end. The climate crisis that we're seeing right now, it is acute. In this past year, we have seen so much evidence of the situation in which the world finds itself, from fires to floods to winds to extreme drought and extreme weather, to the sense that probably this pandemic happened at least in part because we have invaded the natural habitats of animals and we live too close to them, and we haven't let them have their space so that we could have ours, and our spaces are intermingled in ways that are no longer safe. All of the flooding, the fires, the extreme weather and extreme drought, all of this threatens people. But the people who are most threatened, I think, by climate change and by the impending climate disaster that we see unfolding are most especially indigenous communities, communities of color, and communities of poverty. And this is true in the US and it's true across the world. I think it's really important for us to understand at some deep and spiritual level that there cannot be peace, there cannot be justice, there cannot be equity in our nation or in the world unless or until we change our relationship with God's creation and God's creatures. We must heal our relationship with what the Book of Common Prayer used in the Episcopal Church calls this fragile earth, our island home. The fragile earth, our island home, is the place that supports the human race, all of us. We are all in this, all of us. It impacts all of us. I believe that the Bible reveals a God who calls each person who would want to think of themselves as God's child and as a faithful person. We are called to love, to cherish, to respect, and to honor who and what God loves. And that means all people, all God's creatures, all God's living things, the earth, the seas, the sky, the air. If we want our children and our grandchildren to have a livable world, we have to act now, and we have to care about God's creation and creatures the way that God does. And we have to start acting like stewards and not merely users, but lovers of what God has given us.
Thank you. Yes.
That's just all so good. I think I'm so glad that we're focusing on the spring piece tonight, because it's just because of the prop that you used and the string. We cannot deny the connectivity at all, you know, and even just it got prefaced by what Sasha said at the beginning about her movement, about it affected the one thing, the winter. And you might think that it's just that one separate effect, but then we watch the spring piece and the connectivity is just so obvious. And I think the thing that everybody shared, Alex and Virginia especially, I just kept hearing that connection, the connection. We're all connected. And Virginia, you talked about if we see ourselves as a child of God. I have 6 children. They're brothers and sisters. So they're not just children on their own. They are part of a family. And one of the things that we've been talking about as a company is that this piece, one of the things that we're trying to do as human beings is put what's happening in the created world, in the natural world, that we've tricked ourselves into seeing ourselves as something separate and different, but we're not. We're part of the community of the creation. We're all part, and we're all connected. And not just the natural world, but thank you, Alex, for tying us into people who really live with asphalt more than grass. So we're talking about how difficult it is to think about the music, the backwards movement of growing, and how that can be hampered. And maybe people who are living where there's not a lot of grass aren't aware of the growing that's being affected, but their breathing is being affected. So just thank you, because we cannot deny our connection to one another, our connection to the created world, and our connection to God, because as you pointed out, that's sin. That's what separates us from all of those things. And so we live in dis-ease. Yeah. So thanks.
Thank you, Morley. And now we're going to see the dance one more time. But before we do, I'd love for the dancers to just quickly kind of go in tandem, showing your movements that you want us all to see. Here we go. Ricky's going to show you her movement again.
Yeah, so my movement was when Emily brings the string, just getting caught up in the whirlwind after hearing everything that Reverend Virginia and Alex said. It just really brought to mindset to how water, when it flows, it goes everywhere unless it's guided. So for me, I just want to see I want to point out to you how one person's movement hits into another person's movement.
Mine is in the string part, when Emily falls forward on the string and she's dragged back. And that reminds me of what we're talking about. And even Scott with the music, the reversing of the sounds, the bringing back, the enclosing in, the reverse of life.
My two movements are this up and over motion, and when I'm on the string and I fall back on it, and then I fall forward on it. So just imagine that was a string. Just thinking about that, encompassing everything that was said earlier.
My movement was the last movement of spring, when Ricky, Sasha, and I all drop the string that's been entangled around Emily, and then we walk away as a revelation of what we have done and how we have become further from God.
And now we're going to watch the second movement of Body and Land, Spring. Ricky, maybe if you have any questions from the audience, we could answer one or two before we close.
Yeah, I know we only have a few minutes here. So I just want to ask, let me take a look. We had a few comments down here, but since we're kind of time, I'll just go right to the question. So Reverend Virginia, you were talking about just this creation and the honor and the stewardship as a church. And previously you talked a little bit about a garden. And since this is the first day of spring and our piece is about, spring in general, I just wanted to hear more about your, how to say this, let me see. The way that you take the role or the responsibility as a person, but also within the body of Christ to use to garden, how you see that in scripture and really how that sorry, I'm taking away another question. How you see that in scripture, but also how you are able to use that to affect not only the environment, but also other minorities or just in general to care for the earth, to care for people.
Well, the garden has become a way to feed people who are suffering from food insecurity. Many of them are members of marginalized communities and have been homeless for some period of time. We run the garden as an organic garden, so we try to stay close to the earth and to honor the earth that God gives us, the rain, the water, the air, the sun, to make use of all those elements to produce something which feeds people, which nourishes people. It has meant a lot to us to be part of a community garden movement across Connecticut. There are a lot of community gardens springing up. The garden is a metaphor over and over again in the Old Testament and the New. The Old Testament starts in a garden, as we all know. And I think that for us, we have loved it also because it takes so many of us to run the garden. There are people who water, there are people who plant, there are people who harvest, there are people who weed, there are people who deliver the food. We bless it every Sunday, and it's something that we as a community do together. And I think it nourishes us as the body of Christ here in Vernon to be part of something bigger than ourselves and to be using God's creation to assist people and doing so in ways that don't harm the piece of land and the place that we are planted here in Vernon, but which is sustainable. Sustainability matters a lot. So I hope that answers your question, Ricky.
Yes, thank you so much. The next question's for Alex. You touched on this concept of, what did you say? Sorry, you talked about just the climate accountability and securing job security for people in the transportation industry. And so the question is, I had to go to where it is, just as this is the season of spring, how can we move the conversation from this person versus that person or this versus this and into more of a discussion of coming together? And the big question here was just, what's one simple thing, one way we can either continue that conversation, move it into a place of coming together and healing, coming together and tackling something from both sides in unity as opposed to pitting against each other. And specifically, like one thing we can do as this is a season of spring, you're from Save the Sound, just in that small way that we can start tomorrow with this new season, new life.
I think we need to move in an intersectional way. Intersectionality, intersectional justice is how we all need to look at this, because all things connect.
Oh, we need to hear that part again. Yeah.
So everything is connected, as Reverend Virginia pointed out. We're all connected. We are all one. If we choose to see ourselves that way, because we should, because we all breathe the same air. We all need water to survive. It's not us versus the fossil fuel industry. it's us, and it's us challenging our fellow inhabitants of this earth to do better, to conserve, to protect, to love our fellow humans, are in an intersectional way. I think that's how I'd like to frame this.
We will provide some links for resources that you can provide us, Alex, so that everyone who saw today's dance dialogue or wants to share this video will have actionable steps that they can take in supporting these bills that you mentioned, and hearing more about Save the Sound and your organization, and also about what your community garden is doing. Virginia, awesome work, and it's so great to hear all of these beautiful things springing up all around. Okay, and so at this time, on behalf of the dancers, I would like to thank our panelists, speakers, artist collaborators, technical director, Anna, lighting designer Chris Bell, and composer Scott Simonelli.
And if you would like to join our mailing list to get notified of the April Dance and Dialogue and other future performances, go to our website at ekklesiaballet.org.
Also, if you enjoyed this Dance and Dialogue event and would like to make a contribution, we greatly appreciate it. Our dancers here are paid for every performance, and that is directly provided by your support. We will be sending a follow-up email tonight where you can click on a link to donate and also to share your thoughts with a brief survey. We would love to hear from you.
We are also so excited to announce that we will be having an outdoor in-person performance on May 16th. More details will come soon, so save the date.
And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we will be posting tonight's event, and you can share the link with your family and friends. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and have a great night.